Smoke hung thick in the cabin, curling through the rafters like ghost fingers. Snow pressed against the walls, melting into crimson-streaked puddles on the floor. Footsteps creaked above, uneven, hesitant, each one echoing like a warning. Muffled groans drifted from somewhere behind a closed door, mingling with distant screams carried on the bitter Appalachian wind. The fire had guttered to embers, casting trembling shadows across a shattered heirloom and a child's torn doll, its button eye staring blankly into darkness. A voice, trembling yet certain, whispered, "He didn't run, he didn't beg." Outside, the night held its breath. It was 3:17 a.m., winter 1823, and the shadows waited. The plantation lay in a hollow, wrapped by snow-dusted hills and dark woods that clung to the fog like a shroud. Timber buildings sagged under years of neglect, their roofs bowed, windows blackened with soot. The wind whispered through hollow trees, carrying a hollow groan that mingled with the distant howl of wolves. Each gust rattled shutters and loosened the snow on the eaves, sending icy powder drifting like ashes. The air smelled of smoke, wet earth, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Iron chains lay abandoned in the snow, frozen stiff, and half-burned letters smoldered in the hearth, their inked words lost to ash. Hiram Crow shuffled along the icy path toward the barn, his back bent, his hands shaking, as if the chill had rooted itself in his bones. His nose was raw, bleeding again from the wind's bite, streaking crimson across his pallid face. He stopped at the barn door, pausing as the wind moaned through the rafters. "Damn winter," he muttered, teeth chattering. "Always comes for the weak." Inside, Maggie Shaw stirred a pot of herbs, the scent of lavender and rosemary mixing with the damp, rank smell of straw. Her hands smelled of iron and smoke, her knuckles white as she adjusted the bundle of medicinal roots. She glanced toward Hiram. "You're late," she said, her voice carrying a rasp of curiosity and dread. Snow drifts high. Overseer's eyes sharper than ever. Hiram lowered his gaze. "Saw nothing. Barely made it past the woods," he muttered. He shuffled closer to the hearth and noticed a scrap of paper half hidden under a loose floorboard. Kneeling, he drew it out carefully. A leather-bound journal, edges scorched, lay damp from the melting snow that had seeped through the boards. He opened it, and the faint scent of mildew and soot rose with it. His hands trembled. Maggie leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "Where did you find that?" "Under the floor, hidden like someone wanted it buried," Hiram whispered. The words on the page were smudged, but the ink told of whispered horrors, names, dates, punishments, family secrets, too cruel to speak aloud. Each line felt heavier than the snow pressing on the roof above. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant footsteps, heavy and deliberate, but the source remained unseen. Somewhere on the property, overseers laughed, their authority unchecked, while enslaved families labored under the cold, bending to a routine that demanded fear above hope. The local sheriff's absence was no mistake. Law barely reached these hills, and cruelty here had room to fester. Hiram's eyes met Maggie's. "These hills, they hold more than snow," he said quietly. "Something buried, something waiting." She nodded, a shiver running down her spine. The journal trembled in Hiram's hands, and the wind outside seemed to hush, listening. For the first time, both felt the weight of what history had left behind, hidden in ash chains and secrets too dark to speak aloud. The wind bit harder that winter, rattling the thin walls of the Boone cabin, carrying the scent of smoke and pine from the distant hills. Inside, a single candle flickered, its light trembling over the worn floorboards. Chains hung by the hearth, relics of punishments long past but never forgotten. A broken heirloom ring, half buried in the dirt, glinted faintly as if mocking the family's misfortune. Thomas Calhoun entered the clearing, boots crunching over frozen mud. His scarred left eye scanned the cabin before settling on the children. He kept a flask tucked into his coat, the whiskey smell masking the stench of sweat and manure. "Move!" he barked, voice rough as splintered wood. The Boones flinched. Eliza Boone sat on the floor, fingers stained dark from the ink she had stolen from the overseer's ledger. A lullaby escaped her lips quietly, the notes trembling like smoke. Samuel Boone, older by 4 years, sat beside her silent, hands busy fashioning a small wooden lockpick. His movements were deliberate, precise, tools for survival in a place that offered none. "You think hiding and scribbling will save you?" Thomas snapped, stepping closer. The scar across his eye twitched as he sneered. "You'll learn soon enough. Pain is the only teacher these hills respect." Eliza looked up, eyes wide but defiant. "I don't want your lessons," she whispered, her voice soft yet carrying the weight of stubborn hope. Samuel's hand brushed hers, a silent promise. He had learned early to guard her, to take the blows meant for her if he could, to endure the scarlet marks left behind, minor injuries that never fully healed. He remembered the first public whipping he had witnessed, a man tied to a post, chains clinking as the overseer's whip cracked. The sound had burned into Samuel's memory, a rhythm of fear and injustice he could not shake. The cabin was a theater of cruelty and quiet resistance. Their mother, long gone, had left behind lessons in survival, how to hide letters, how to speak in code, how to make a broken chain useful again. Eliza hummed the lullaby her mother had sung, a fragile thread of comfort in the darkness. Samuel taught her how to carve secret symbols into floorboards and the backs of furniture, marking paths and messages no overseer could decipher. One evening, hidden beneath the loose floorboard where a candle flickered, Eliza found a half-burned page of poetry. Her fingers traced the words, tasting forbidden knowledge. "Samuel, do you think freedom is real?" she asked, eyes wide, the ink staining her fingertips a badge of rebellion. Samuel's jaw tightened. "It is," he said quietly. "But it's not given. It's taken. We have to be ready." His voice carried the weight of guilt he bore for thinking, even fleetingly, that they might not survive the overseer's cruelty. Every night, he wrestled with the fear that one mistake could cost them both. Yet he felt a protective pride swelling beneath the fear. Thomas prowled the edge of the cabin's small yard, listening to the soft scrape of Samuel's tools. He kicked a log, sending a shower of snow into the darkness. "I see you," he muttered, more to himself than the children. The whiskey on his breath burned his throat. He thrived on fear, on breaking spirits slowly, leaving marks that would never fade. But Thomas did not know that fear had already begun to breed defiance in the Boone siblings. Eliza lifted her voice again in the lullaby, carrying it outside the cabin, a fragile sound against the howl of the wind. Samuel's eyes followed her, scanning the tree line, imagining paths of escape, measuring distance and shadow. Their small acts of rebellion, a carved letter, a whispered prayer, a stolen page, were threads weaving a secret tapestry of resistance. The broken heirloom ring, left on the cabin floor, gleamed in the candlelight, a symbol of what had been taken and what might yet be reclaimed. Samuel fingered it absent-mindedly while mending a splintered piece of wood into a lockpick. Chains rattled in the distance as Thomas punished another family in the yard, a reminder of what they fought against. By nightfall, the cabin grew silent. Eliza's lullabies ceased, replaced by the soft scratch of Samuel's carving tools. Shadows clung to the walls like memories, whispering of pain, defiance, and a dream they could not yet name: freedom. The snow outside muffled the world beyond, but within, the siblings' small, quiet rebellion had already begun. Eliza closed her eyes, imagining a life beyond the chains. Samuel sat beside her, resolve hardening in his chest. They did not yet know the trials ahead, the betrayals, or the cruelties to come. But in that candlelit cabin, a seed of defiance had taken root, fragile yet unbreakable. The early morning mist clung to the woods like a living thing, curling around the trunks of blackened pines and dripping silently onto the snow-covered ground. The Boone cabin sat at the edge of this forest, half hidden from prying eyes, its small windows dark except for the faint glow of candlelight within. It was here that Clara Whitlock arrived, a free woman of quiet defiance, her skirts dusted with frost and the faint scent of lavender and ash trailing behind her. She carried a small satchel filled with worn books and scraps of paper. "Good morning, Eliza," Clara said, voice soft yet commanding, as she bent low to meet the girl's eyes. Eliza's fingers trembled as she tucked a stolen page of writing into her sleeve. "Are you ready today?" Eliza nodded, lips stained with ink, eyes wide with excitement. "I want to learn. I want to read it all." Samuel watched from the shadows, hands idle for a moment as he carved a small notch into a piece of wood. Clara had begun teaching him more than letters and words. She showed him the secrets of carpentry, of hidden tunnels beneath the cabin that could serve as escape paths if the day ever came. Samuel absorbed it all with quiet intensity, the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. "Micah will join us today," Clara said, glancing toward the forest edge. "He's eager to learn too. Keep your voices low." Eliza's heart fluttered. Micah was a boy of her age with quick hands and a shy smile that made her stomach twist. She felt the warmth of something forbidden, a subtle affection she had never allowed herself before. The two of them exchanged a glance, shy and fleeting, as they crouched together under the low beam where Clara spread open the pages. Meanwhile, beyond the edges of the plantation, a shadow watched. Jonathan Price hummed as he moved through the snow, his steps silent, eyes glinting with cruel curiosity. He stopped occasionally, crouching to spy through the bare branches at the children gathered with Clara. Jonathan's whistle was low, musical, almost tender in tone, but those who knew him understood the duality. The same lips that hummed could crush a bird's skull or worse. He made mental notes, memorizing faces, movements, even the tiniest gestures. By nightfall, he would report back to Thomas Calhoun, ensuring that whispers of rebellion never went unchecked. Inside the cabin, Clara placed a worn quill into Eliza's small hand. "Write your thoughts," she instructed. "Hide the letters in the hollow log by the creek. No one can read them there, and your words will live beyond this place." Eliza's fingers shook as she pressed the nib to the page. Every letter felt like a heartbeat of defiance, a silent promise she would keep hidden from overseers, even as the shadow of Jonathan Price loomed closer each day. Samuel guided Micah in carving small symbols into the underside of a floorboard. "These marks are directions," Samuel whispered. "Paths we can follow when we run. No one will know." "No one!" Micah's eyes widened, both excited and terrified. The hidden tunnels Clara had shown Samuel were now more than just escape routes. They were secret worlds, maps of hope beneath the cold, oppressive ground. Eliza dared to glance at Micah as he carefully copied Samuel's symbols. Her heart beat unevenly, a quiet rebellion of emotions she could not name. Every stolen moment with him felt like warmth in a world of ice. Every whispered instruction, a tether to a life she might one day claim. Outside, the wind rattled the skeletal trees. Jonathan crouched near the edge of the clearing, scribbling in a notebook with the same meticulous care he used to torment animals. The sunlight had yet to touch the snow, leaving the forest draped in shadows. He hummed again, innocuous to any casual observer, but inside, the seeds of betrayal had already taken root. Every smile, every secret lesson, every hidden letter could be used against them. Clara leaned over the children, brushing a strand of ink-stained hair from Eliza's face. "Knowledge is power," she whispered, "but only if you keep it safe." Eliza pressed the page into the hollow log later that day, burying it beneath the snow and moss, a fragile promise that no overseer, no cousin, no chain could ever truly erase. And as the shadows lengthened, the children's whispered lessons and carved symbols became threads of a rebellion still too small to see, yet growing beneath the frostbitten hills, watched by eyes that meant them harm. Snow crunched under careful footsteps as Samuel and Micah crept toward the edge of the barn, a damp journal clutched tightly between them. Their breaths formed clouds in the frigid morning air, mingling with the faint smoke from the hearths inside the main house. Samuel's hand brushed Micah's shoulder. "Quiet, almost there," he whispered, eyes scanning the tree line. A sudden whistle cut through the stillness. Samuel froze. Micah's hand went rigid. Jonathan Price stepped from behind the trees, humming the same low, innocent tune he always carried, but his eyes glinted like sharpened steel. The journal slipped slightly from Samuel's grasp. "Well, well," Jonathan said, voice soft, yet dripping with menace. He tapped the journal with a boot. "I think you've been busy." He knelt, lifting the book with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Some sins deserve chains, others deserve fire." Samuel's stomach dropped. "Jonathan!" He started, voice tight, but Jonathan's smile widened. He signaled to the overseers waiting just beyond the clearing. Within moments, hands gripped Samuel and Micah, dragging them into the yard. Snow turned crimson under their struggling feet. The wind seemed to still, listening to the sounds of punishment. Thomas Calhoun arrived, boots slamming against frozen earth, the scar across his left eye catching the pale sunlight. "What have we here?" he barked. Samuel's fists clenched. Micah trembled. Both boys were yanked toward the central post where chains hung, rusted but ready. Eliza's breath caught as she peered from the doorway of the cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had imagined many punishments, whispered fears late at night, but the reality made her stomach turn. Chains rattled, the journal fell to the snow and skidded to the edge of a frozen puddle. Pages were smeared, charred where embers had kissed the corners during past attempts to hide secrets. Firelight reflected off terrified eyes, painting the scene in flickering gold and crimson. A hush fell over the small gathering of enslaved families. Some averted their eyes, fear gripping them like iron. Others murmured under their breath, silent rage hidden in whispers. Maggie Shaw shivered nearby, her hands pressed against her mouth, wishing the snow would swallow the scene whole. Even Hiram Crow's knees shook, bent over the frozen earth. Samuel's jaw tightened, pain flaring across his shoulders and back as the whip cracked against his skin. Each lash echoed like thunder through the hollow hills. Micah whimpered, eyes wide, clutching at the chains. Samuel forced himself to breathe evenly, tasting blood in the snow and feeling the icy sting along his arms. Every blow drove a vow deeper into his chest. He would never forgive, never forget, and he would rise beyond this cruelty. Eliza pressed a hand to her mouth, tears freezing along her lashes. Her innocence fractured, replaced by the stark understanding that the world offered no mercy here. She had thought she could hide in shadows, hum lullabies, and steal stolen knowledge safely, but innocence was a luxury she could no longer afford. Every whispered letter, every carved symbol, every secret tunnel was now a lifeline, rather than a mere act of defiance. Jonathan stepped back, watching with satisfaction, humming softly again as if the whipping were a lullaby. His calculating gaze swept the yard, memorizing every glance, every flicker of rebellion. He had revealed himself fully, not merely a spy, but an architect of torment, a predator who measured cruelty like a craftsman. Thomas Calhoun spat, stepping closer to the boys. "Remember this," he said, voice low and venomous. "Chains are never far from those who dare to steal from me." The snow, once pure, was now stained red, reflecting a fire that threatened to burn more than the journal or the boy's skin. It threatened to consume hope itself. Eliza shivered, turning her face from the sight, but she knew this was not the end. This betrayal, this cruelty, would etch itself into their bones. And beneath it all, a tiny ember of resolve began to glow, a defiance that even Jonathan's whispers of fire could not fully extinguish. Night swallowed the plantation, draping the snow and timber buildings in black velvet. The wind whispered against the eaves, rattling shutters like distant chains, and the faint howl of wolves carried across the hills. Within the Boone cabin, candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows that merged with the night. Samuel, Eliza, and Micah huddled around a rough wooden table, plotting in whispers. Every word carried weight. Every breath was measured. "We need more than luck," Samuel murmured, carving a small notch into a stick, a symbol only they understood. "We need allies, tools, signals." His eyes flicked toward Eliza, who nodded, clutching the journal of secret letters she had begun burying in hollow logs along the creek. Each letter contained careful instructions, coded warnings, and scraps of knowledge that could guide their plan. Rebecca, the older enslaved woman, arrived silently through the back door, her scarred hand resting on her cane. The air smelled faintly of herbs, iron, and smoke clinging to her skin. "You children think courage alone will save you," she said, voice rasping but steady. "Poison is silent. Fire is loud. Both will speak for us when we cannot." She laid out small vials of crushed roots, dried leaves, and powders. Samuel examined them, memorizing each, noting which could slip unnoticed into stew pots and which could mark a trail of deception. Thomas Boone, Samuel's distant cousin, arrived next, boots crunching on frozen earth. He carried a silver locket that glinted in candlelight, swinging slightly as he moved. "I'll guard the perimeter," he said. "Jonathan Price won't see us coming if we stay silent." His loyalty was evident in the set of his jaw, in the way his strong shoulders flexed against the cold, ready to shield their fragile defiance. Late in the evening, Elias Carr, the wandering preacher, joined them. He smelled faintly of smoke and worn leather, his voice a low hum as he passed among the group. "Songs can hide messages," he said, leaning close. "The codes are in the verses, in the hymns. They'll never suspect a preacher." His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room. He was defiant in ways the overseers would never understand, a silent rebel under the guise of faith. The trio, along with their allies, began preparation with meticulous care. Samuel carved small symbols into tools and floorboards, secret maps for escape. Eliza marked hollow logs along the creek, embedding letters beneath moss and snow. Each message was a whisper of rebellion, meant only for those who knew the code. Rebecca mixed her powders, cautioning, "A pinch too much, and it kills. A pinch too little, and it whispers." They practiced signals, candles placed in windows, smoke from small fires in chimneys, even the soft-hummed lullabies Eliza carried, each a call to gather or hide. Every detail mattered. Every ritual reinforced trust and secrecy. Suspense clawed at them twice in the night. First, as Jonathan Price approached, whistling innocuously while inspecting the perimeter, Thomas Boone dragged Samuel and Eliza behind the cabin, just as Jonathan's eyes scanned the snow for movement. The wind carried their breath away, hiding their presence. Later, a patrol of overseers passed near the hollow log, where Eliza had buried a new letter. Micah flattened himself against the snow, holding his breath until the men moved on, unaware that a message of defiance lay inches from discovery. Chains rattled somewhere beyond the cabin, a constant reminder of what awaited if they were caught. Lullabies floated softly through the night, echoing like ghosts of hope and memory. Firelight danced in the windows, flickering across eyes that had learned to watch and wait. Letters passed from hand to hand, a network of secret knowledge that could outlast any overseer's cruelty. By midnight, their preparations had reached a quiet crescendo. Each ally understood their role. Samuel led the construction of hidden paths and tools. Eliza carried coded messages. Micah assisted with scouting. Rebecca prepared herbal defenses. Thomas patrolled and protected, and Elias ensured that coded hymns masked their movements from ears that would betray them. Outside, the plantation lay silent beneath the frozen snow, yet beneath that silence a pulse of defiance throbbed. Every etched symbol, hidden letter, and whispered lullaby carried the promise of what was to come. The night was theirs, fleeting and fragile, but within its shadows, hope flickered like a stubborn flame, waiting to ignite a rebellion the hills would never forget. Night swallowed the plantation in a blanket of ice and shadow. Smoke drifted from chimneys, mingling with the copper tang of blood spilled long before the first act of rebellion. Samuel, Eliza, and Micah crept from the woods, tools hidden beneath heavy coats, hearts hammering against ribs as if trying to warn them back. The frozen ground crunched beneath their boots, each sound amplified by tension, each breath a fragile confession. Thomas Boone led the way, silver locket glinting faintly in the dim moonlight. "Stay close," he whispered. "If they spot one of us, it's over." Elias Carr trailed behind, humming a low hymn. Each note carried coded instructions. Each pause was a signal. The plantation, silent from the outside, was alive with danger, Guards patrolled, chains rattled, and Jonathan Price's keen eyes were never far. Inside the main house, Thomas Calhoun slept heavily, whiskey still lingering on his breath. His scarred eye twitched even in dreams, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Smoke began to curl from the small barn where Samuel and his allies had piled kindling and straw. Rebecca sprinkled a fine powder into the fire, an herbal accelerant she knew would burn bright, fast, and disorient any who approached. The first sparks caught, hissing as flames licked the timbers. Samuel held his breath, the metallic taste of cold and fear sharp on his tongue. Eliza gripped Micah's hand, the journal tucked against her chest, knowing that every whisper, every secret message had led them here. A scream pierced the night, the sound of chains clattering as Jonathan Price lunged toward the barn door. Samuel moved before thinking, swinging the carved club he had prepared. Metal rang against metal. The echo carried through the hills. "We were never meant to kneel, but tonight we stand," Samuel shouted, voice fierce, stripped of the hesitation that had once restrained him. Eliza ran past the smoke, every inhalation thick with soot and coppery blood. She faced the horrors she had hidden from herself, flames reflected in terrified eyes, the smell of burning timber, the whip scars of past victims still vivid, and embraced survival over fear. She threw vials of herbal powder toward the overseers, chasing them. A pungent cloud rose, choking and blinding. Thomas Calhoun stumbled from the main house, awakened by screams and crackling fire. He slipped on icy steps, whiskey-laden hands fumbling, chains from a nearby storage room tangling around his legs. Samuel's eyes met his as he passed, cold and resolute. For the first time, the overseer was vulnerable. Thomas's voice roared, half in rage, half in disbelief. "You insolent!" But the words died in his throat as Samuel's strike landed, a sharp crack that echoed like justice in the night. Jonathan fought violently, lunging at Micah with a knife. Sparks flew as he swung, catching Thomas Boone's arm. Blood blossomed on Thomas's sleeve and he staggered. Micah ducked just in time, feeling the rush of wind as steel cut air. Chaos erupted in every direction. The fire roared, the barn shook, chains rattled against posts, and minor characters were swept into the maelstrom. Hiram Crow appeared at the edge of the chaos, shouting a warning to the overseers, but a falling beam struck him, pinning him beneath its weight. His scream ended in silence, snow already covering him. Maggie Shaw ran from the scene, stumbling through the woods, her hands trembling, a vision of terror and ash. Samuel's hands were slick with sweat and blood. Innocence had been burned away along with the timbers. Each blow he delivered carried the weight of years, of witnessed cruelty, of whispered dreams crushed. He moved with purpose now, a shadow of vengeance and survival intertwined. Eliza's fingers, once only capable of ink-stained writing, now gripped tools, flung powders, and guided escape paths with precision. Even Micah, trembling at first, became resolute, aiding allies, carrying messages, marking paths through the chaos. The fire spread, consuming barns and fences. Smoke choked the air, embers swirled like angry fireflies, each one a tiny beacon of destruction and defiance. Shadows leapt across the snow, distorted and monstrous in the flames' light. Chains clattered, vials shattered, and lullabies, once whispered in secret, now rose as cries of resistance echoing through the hills. Jonathan's scream split the night as a burning beam pinned him, the heat and smoke searing his face. He clawed at the timber, eyes wide with terror. Thomas Calhoun stumbled again, cursing as he tried to lift the fallen wood. "You'll pay for this," he shouted, but the sound was lost amidst the roar of fire and chaos. Eliza found herself in the center of the turmoil, flinging a powder-laced vial at a group of guards. She inhaled sharply, tasting the bitterness of survival, and realized that fear no longer controlled her. Samuel appeared beside her, hands bloody, face streaked with soot. "We do this together," he said, voice steady, hardened by pain. By the time dawn began to gray the horizon, the plantation lay in ruin. Smoke curled from collapsed roofs. Snow was stained red in patches, footprints and blood marking the night's path. Jonathan Price lay trapped, screaming under a fallen beam. Hiram Crowe was gone, buried under the chaos he tried to prevent. Maggie Shaw's figure disappeared into the trees, haunted by what she had witnessed. Thomas Calhoun, humiliated and wounded, watched helplessly as the children he had thought weak now moved with lethal intent, shaping the night to their will. Samuel, Eliza, and Micah stood together amid the ruin, eyes scanning the aftermath. Silence fell, heavier than any whip, broken only by distant groans and the hiss of dying embers. Samuel's gaze swept the snow, then settled on Eliza. "We were never meant to kneel," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "But tonight, we stand." Eliza nodded, the firelight reflecting in her eyes, mingling with soot, blood, and tears. Survival had reshaped them all, stripping away innocence, forging resolve, and igniting a defiance that would echo through the hills long after the night ended. Dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the Boone plantation, casting pale light across snow-stained crimson and blackened timber. Smoke curled upward, thin as a wisp, carrying with it the scent of burnt wood, iron, and scorched flesh. The once ordered world of chains, whips, and silent obedience lay shattered in ruin. Bodies of overseers, twisted and broken, lay among the rubble. Thomas Calhoun had survived, but his pride and authority were as broken as the buildings around him. Every step through the ruined yard carried the weight of what had been lost and what had been gained. Samuel walked among the ruins with careful eyes, checking corners, scanning shadows. The scars of the night were etched into his muscles and soul. He counted losses silently. Hiram Crowe gone, Maggie Shaw disappeared, Rebecca nursing burns from fire and powder. Even victory had its price, a ledger written in blood and ash. He touched the charred remains of a support beam and whispered almost to himself, "We did what we had to, but at what cost?" Eliza crouched beside him, holding a scrap of soot-stained journal. Her fingers were blackened with ash, her lips stiff with cold and soot. She had survived, yes, but every lullaby she had whispered, every note of comfort, now carried a bitter echo of screams and fear. She thought of Micah lying bruised but breathing, and of the allies whose bodies might never be found. Her dream of freedom was no longer a gentle hope. It was a sharp, jagged resolve. The surviving overseers regrouped at the edge of the plantation, nursing wounds and bruised egos. Jonathan Price had been freed from the fallen beam by a loyal servant, his eyes alight with revenge rather than fear. "They've stolen everything," he hissed, wiping soot from his face. "Everything they touch becomes ashes, but they cannot hide forever." Plans were made in whispers, militia summoned from neighboring hills, traps laid along known escape paths, and bounty promises dangling over the heads of every survivor. The oppressive hierarchy, though battered, sought to reclaim itself with the ferocity of those who cannot accept loss. Word of the revolt spread quickly. Enslaved families whispered in cottages and barns, their voices trembling between fear and fascination. The mountains seemed to hum with the tale of children who fought back, a mixture of hope and terror coiling in each story. The local militia arrived days later, cold-eyed and suspicious, interrogating villagers and scouring the hills. Snowdrifts were disturbed by countless boots, yet Samuel and Eliza were already gone, shadows among shadows. Some allies were captured and executed. The punishment was swift, public, a reminder that rebellion bore a price. Others, like Thomas Boone and Elias Carr, vanished into the hills with minor injuries, the taste of survival bitter yet precious. In the wake of the attack, guilt and grief weighed heavily. Samuel could not shake the sight of Hiram Crowe pinned beneath timber, nor the silent panic of Maggie Shaw as she fled. Every memory pressed against him like chains. Eliza, too, wrestled with the trauma, her voice hoarse from screaming against fire and smoke, her fingers raw from clutching tools, powders, and journals. Yet in that pain, a fragile pride bloomed. They had struck back against cruelty, even if survival required shadows and secrets. Every ember of fire, every hidden letter, every coded lullaby became a talisman of resistance, proof that oppression could be defied. Rumors began to twist the story beyond recognition. Some spoke of cannibalism, whispers fueled by fear and the blackened remains of food stores, charred and unidentifiable. Others claimed spectral sightings of Eliza Boone, humming lullabies along frozen creeks, her eyes glowing in the reflection of moonlight on snow. The tales grew with each retelling. Children who rose from chains, the haunted plantations, the ghostly cries of vengeance echoing in winter nights. Samuel's carpentry marks and hidden tunnels became secret maps in these legends. Rebecca's powders and Elias's hymns transformed into magical defenses in the telling. Even the scars on Thomas Calhoun's face were mythologized. He became a cautionary figure, a symbol of cruel authority undone by those he deemed weak. For the survivors, life resumed in fragments. Nights were long, filled with fear of pursuit, but also the sharp thrill of freedom, however tentative. They moved in shadows, exchanged secret letters, and kept alive the rituals of defiance. A candle in a window, a coded note in a hollow log, a whispered lullaby in the night. The mountains, silent witnesses, held their secrets, echoing both sorrow and triumph. Every breath of cold air, every crackle of fire, every rustle in the woods was a reminder that the rebellion had not ended. It had merely changed form, growing into legend. And in that aftermath, the community felt a mixture of terror and awe. Fear kept some silent. Admiration stirred in others' hearts. The rebellion had left scars that would not fade. Samuel and Eliza, though in hiding, had become names murmured in hushed voices, symbols of courage, defiance, and the price of challenging tyranny. They were ghosts and heroes at once, etched into the memory of the hills, their deeds spreading like whispered fire, carried on winter winds, in lullabies, in letters, in stories that refused to die. Decades later, the Boone Revolt was no longer remembered only as history. It had become legend. In the Appalachian Hills, elders whispered of the cannibal family, a name that struck fear into some and awe into others. The details had twisted and grown, like ivy over an old cabin. Stories of spectral children moving through snow, humming lullabies that carried warnings or curses, eyes glowing in the reflection of fire. The revolt itself, the planning, the alliances, the bitter sacrifice, became a backdrop for tales of vengeance and the supernatural. In one version, Eliza Boone became the centerpiece of myth. She was no longer merely a girl who had survived. She was the embodiment of cunning and defiance. Her lullabies were said to float over frozen creeks at midnight, echoing softly, warning those who would enslave or oppress. Some claimed her spirit carried the journals she had once hidden, each letter infused with knowledge, power, and curses for the unjust. Children spoke of seeing her silhouette among the trees, small and fragile in appearance, yet moving with the determination of the unyielding. Samuel Boone's figure became the shadowy avenger of the folklore. He was described as a man who emerged from smoke and blood, carving justice into the hills. Where the real Samuel had been careful, strategic, and merciless when necessary, the stories painted him as unstoppable, an almost mythic force, leaving trails of burned barns and vanquished tyrants. Some tales spoke of him guiding hidden tunnels beneath plantations, slipping unseen through walls, or disappearing into woods where no man could follow. The scarred overseers and even Jonathan Price were said to have felt his presence before they fell, a whisper of vengeance in the night air. Fire, chains, and blood remained central motifs in the tales. Every storytelling circle, from candlelit cabins to clandestine gatherings in barns, repeated the details with emphasis, smoke curling from burning buildings, chains rattling against posts as if in protest, and blood turning snow into an eternal reminder of courage and sacrifice. Letters hidden in logs and under floorboards were rumored to carry secret wisdom, imparting literacy to those daring enough to seek them. Songs once hummed in whispers became local anthems, teaching children to read through coded hymns. In some regions, a lullaby from Eliza's legend became a bedtime chant, a quiet rebellion against ignorance and fear. Some exaggerations bordered on the impossible, accounts of ghostly children striking down overseers. plantations igniting at midnight without human hands, Jonathan Price himself seen wandering as a wraith, hunted endlessly by shadowy figures. Yet these stories carried kernels of truth, acts of rebellion, hidden letters, secret tunnels, and nights drenched in fear and fire. Each retelling reinforced the idea that oppression, no matter how cruel, could be challenged. Local folklore scholars later noted that the Boone story had a tangible influence on Appalachian culture. It inspired clandestine literacy movements, with elders teaching reading and writing in secret, passing down knowledge in the same way Clara Whitlock had decades earlier. Songs of defiance spread quietly, embedded with cautionary morals, shaping a culture that revered cunning, resilience, and moral courage. Even the physical landscape bore traces of memory. Hollow logs, carved symbols in tree bark, and underground tunnels became pilgrimage sites for those seeking proof of the legend. The community's collective memory ensured that motifs of chains, blood, fire, letters, and lullabies persisted, echoing across generations. The stories reminded both oppressed and oppressors of the Boone Revolt's lessons. Cruelty could be challenged, courage could emerge from the smallest of hands, and knowledge was a weapon sharper than any whip. In the end, Eliza Boone became more than a person. She became a symbol of survival, cunning, and resistance. Samuel Boone became more than a boy. He became the shadow of vengeance that haunted oppressive structures and inspired whispers of defiance. Even Rebecca, Thomas Boone, and Elias Carr became ghostly figures in these tales, embodiments of courage and ingenuity. And so, the Appalachian foothills carried these echoes into eternity, lullabies threading through winter winds, embers of fire glimmering in tales of midnight revolt, chains rattling in the imagination of those who dared to dream. What had been history became legend, a story of survival, rebellion, and the haunting truth that courage, once awakened, can never be fully extinguished. History is a careful thing, often written by those who survive, those who wield power, those who burn what they cannot control. Yet in the ashes of letters hidden in hollow logs, in the faint echo of lullabies carried on winter wind, the memory of the oppressed persists. Samuel and Eliza Boone were not heroes in the tidy sense. They were children forced into violence, innocents scorched by cruelty. Their rebellion blurs the line between justice and vengeance, survival and sin. Broken chains litter the frozen ground, a reminder that freedom is never granted. It is seized, stolen from those who would deny it. Blood and soot mark the cost, but also the courage it took to rise. The oppressor's screams fade into legend, their authority fractured by the sheer will of those they underestimated. Yet the cycle remains. Cruelty begets courage, courage begets vengeance, vengeance begets stories that whisper warnings to future generations. In the Appalachian hills, the ghost of a lullaby drifts through pines, a haunting thread connecting past and present. The letters burned in fireplaces, the scorched timber, the shadows of those who walked unseen, all speak of memory that refuses erasure. Rebellion, in its raw, messy truth, is both salvation and burden. We are left to ask, what is justice when the world offers none? What is morality when survival demands betrayal, when vengeance is the only language left? The Boone story reminds us that courage does not arrive in clean lines or fair measures. It arrives in whispers, in ink-stained fingers, in hearts hardened and softened at once. History remembers, even if only in echoes, that those who were never meant to stand did, and in standing reshaped the hills and the hearts of those who would dare follow. If you were in their place, facing chains, cruelty, and a world that offered no mercy, what would you do? Could you forgive those who crushed your childhood, who turned innocence into fear? Or would you rise as Samuel, Eliza, and their allies did and burn it all down, leaving nothing but ashes and whispers of defiance? History often asks us to look back, to judge, to mourn, but it rarely offers simple answers. The Boone Revolt forces us to confront moral ambiguity, to wrestle with the cost of survival, and to question whose voices are remembered and whose are erased. Each charred letter, each lullaby drifting through winter hills, each shattered chain is a reminder that courage and cruelty are entwined and that memory itself is a battleground. So we ask you, reflect, question, and remember. Think about the stories hidden in shadows, the lives silenced, the rebellions that flicker in whispers. If you want to uncover more dark history stories hidden in plain sight, stories that challenge perception and reveal the untold, like, share, and subscribe. Join us as we walk the fogged hills, follow the echoes of rebellion, and bring the whispers of the past into the light. History is darker and more fascinating than you think.